to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Sarah Westwick.
I'm Sarah Brown.
And I'm Luke Shelton.
Each episode, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon, so we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you, so without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Tolkien Experience podcast. Today I am very thrilled to introduce our guest, Putri Prihatini, an Indonesian blogger and Tolkien scholar who maintains a website, the Loremaster, blog Tolkien Indonesia. Her article, The Names of Turin Turambar and Spiritual Burden Concept in Javanese Naming Philosophy, was presented by Nelson Goering at the 2018 Tolkien Society Seminar. And this year, her article, Greed and Blood, Powerful Objects in the Silmarillion and Javanese Book of Monarchs, was nominated for Best Article at the 2021 Tolkien Society Awards. Putri, it is so wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's so honored to be featured in Tolkien Experience podcast, finally.
We're so glad to have you here. It's great. So let's just dive right in. I would love to know how you were first introduced to Tolkien's work.
Okay, so the very first time I was exposed to Tolkien's works was actually when the movie came out in Indonesia. I think that was in 2001 or 2002, I forgot, but the hype was so big, and at that time me and my sister were so excited about the movie that we just we bought all the special edition movie magazines that we could find to read about the movies, and then in one of the magazines I found this page about Tolkien, about the person who was responsible about these stories. But at that time, I was still not really, that was still not the focus of my interest, because I was more interested to the movies. And so after I went to the cinema and I watched The Fellowship of the Ring, and I just thought, wow, that was clearly different, like different from any other fantasy movies I've ever watched. And when I returned to the movie magazines, I remember that there was this page about this person, this Tolkien guy, who basically wrote the stories that became the base of this movie. And I simply was very curious about him, and then I read about him, and then after that I start trying to look for other materials that I could find about him, because at that time everything related to Tolkien himself is very limited. Like there are no other materials that I could find. So I found this documentary by National Geographic. I think that was behind the scene of Fellowship of the Rings, but more focused on the inspiration behind Tolkien's work. So stuff like Kalevala and Nordic mythology. So from there, I just tried to look for any other materials I could find through the internet, because I finally found the right keywords that I needed to search further. And after that, I decided to buy the Indonesian translations of The Fellowship of the Rings, and then The Two Towers, and 1 year later, they published The Return of the King, and then The Hobbit. And after that, it's just, it's history from there.
Totally.
But then that was not my first experience with the original English version of Tolkien's works. I only experienced Tolkien in English maybe around 2005, when I finally bought. I felt brave enough to buy the Silmarillion, and I read that in English because there was no translation at that time. And that was also the time when actually my English was still not so good. So I was trying while reading that book. I was learning while reading that book, and I spent maybe around 1 year to finally finish the book. But from there, there's no going back. I mean, it's just it's just I'm just going down this hill of Tolkien, and I could not get back up.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the early experiences that I could remember about being exposed to Tolkien's works.
That's wonderful. That's great. So you were introduced through the films, and then that got you interested in his
Yes,
background, and then
yes,
from there to the texts. That's so
yes.
interesting. Was there anybody like around you, any like friends or other people who were interested in Tolkien that you engaged with at the time, or did that come later for you?
At first, when it came to movies, obviously I got my friends, my school friends, and my sister too. Yeah, because the movies were so popular at that time, and we talk about them a lot. At university, it was the same thing. Mostly my friends who have watched the movies, but at university, I also met a few people who have read the book and they like the books as well as the movies. So the discussion start to to expand a little bit more than from bigger than the scope of the movies alone. But during time, it was kind of fizzled, because because I was so interested with things further than the surface level, like the things that the Tolkien scholar also studied. I would love to know more about Tolkien from that point of view. But at that time the numbers of people who were also interested in Tolkien in that way, like I said before, were kind of fizzled. But yeah, and mostly because, like I said before, our access to those kinds of materials related to Tolkien were very limited. And even with internet, people don't always know what the right keywords to use to search more about this. So, and there are also people who probably are influenced by how the movies presented Tolkien stories, and they thought that, oh, this is just like any other fantasy movies, where adventure movies, where everything is black and white, and it's very obvious who is the hero and who is the villain. While when you study the text, it's way more than that. There are more layers to explore here, but like I said before, it's hard to find someone to who have the same interest with me in that matter. And I actually tried to turn Tolkien into my subject for my final paper in the university. I studied psychology, and there were lots of things from Tolkien's characters that I thought were worthy of exploration. But when I asked my lecturer, she said that she supported my idea. She just thought that probably for a bachelor degree, this is not something that you should do, because maybe it would be better if you go outside and find a subject that is more related to community. Maybe this is something that you could do in the higher level of education, but maybe not now. But she supported my idea. She just thought that this is not something that my university would accept. So yeah, so I guess I just with my blog, I kind of poured my frustration with that answer. So basically I kind of did a lot of things myself. And even though now we have Indonesian Tolkien Society, but yeah, I don't think the discussion is as as varied as what I saw in international Tolkien community. And maybe that's simply because of that the trouble to access the sources that we need to deepen the discussions, and the language barrier and stuff. Yeah, and the reason that not many of us could actually turn Tolkien into something that we could study professionally, academically. So I usually just tell people that my blog is a personal project, because this is something that really excites me. But I hope people can also draw something from that. For Indonesian readers, they could read something about Tolkien that is way deeper, that is usually discussed in public in the term of Indonesian readers. And for English readers or readers who read in English, maybe you could find something, some fresh point of view from what I wrote. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. I think it's really, really good to understand that context, especially,
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying about the limitations of access, for
Yes.
example, that
Yes.
you have.
Yeah.
It's really good to know. And I'm glad that you have, found your blog as this outlet to try and, give something back
Yes.
both to your community, but also to share it with the international community.
Mm-hmm.
So we're more aware as well. So that's wonderful. And that segues really nicely into my next question, which
Okay.
is because of your deep interest, and you were saying like even through
Mm-hmm.
university and everything. What would you say is your favorite part of Tolkien's work? Like, can you pin down something specific, or is it a lot of different things that drew you
Oh
to it?
God, that's very interesting because well, I think if we have unlimited time, we can sit here for hours talking about that. But I think if we want to point out the general things, the general things about Tolkien's work that I could describe in a short way is that, especially when it comes to Middle Earth Legendarium, is that it really a world where you could feel that everything that happened in this world is something that even though they are fantastic, but at the same time they feel grounded as well, like yeah, it's something that you could imagine happen in the past. So it's not something that happened in this faraway foreign land in another world, but so it's fantastic, but at the same time it feels grounding. And I never wrote something like that, but I feel like this is something that is very difficult to achieve, especially when you write something that is set in basically in the secondary world. So I think that's the reason I really like Tolkien's work, especially Middle Earth Legendarium, because by reading his stories that happen in this kind of world, it feels like I could reflect my our own world, like our primary world, to his world. And that's the reason why his book turns into basically a medium of reflection, if you could say that, for me at least, because it feels like this is a good his works give me this unique but at the same time familiar point of view in viewing the world that I live in. So it feels like that. That's the general thing that I like about Tolkien's works. But if I have to pinpoint more specific things, I guess it's from the scenes like in the Lord of the Rings. Some people do not like that because they probably because they feel that the stories drags a little bit in some parts. But I think that's because I like the fact that between these long dangerous quests, and journey, Tolkien didn't forget to insert these small moments of respite, where
Yeah.
the characters just sit and rest and they talk about lighter things, when Frodo and Sam talk about potato, and or when Tolkien actually dedicated some pages describing the hobbits taking hot baths, complete with a song about that, like the sea shanty but for bathroom.
Yeah.
And
That's such a
yeah,
good
this
description.
yes, that's something that really charmed me. It helps grounding this majestic tale about dangerous quest. This basically an elegiac story that reminiscent of the past that is already lost. Those are grand themes. But if you do not insert these more mundane, casual human things between these stories, that they became the, a collection of grand themes without which make us hard to relate to them, because there is this casual really human things that we do every day between this dangerous situations, like basically that's also like in real life, like how the first time I read Tolkien, it was only a few years after basically the end of Indonesia's New Order era, the 3 decades of authoritarian right-wing rulings. So at that time, it was still a very, messy situation. There were lots of horizontal conflicts, and clashes between different ethnic groups and religions, and the massive shifts in the government bodies that basically just the effects just poured down to our lives. So it was still a time full of uncertainties for many of us. But between those uncertainties, there were times when we found basically respites in our day-to-day life. Like talking with our friends or families. Maybe trying this nice food in this restaurant, or finding this good books in the bookstore, and not too expensive. Those small things, those small things between the uncertain times that we experience. That's something that I could relate to the way Tolkien wrote his works, especially the Lord of the Rings. And also small other thing that really stick with me is that this scene when Frodo and Sam met Gildor.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so that was the first experience for Sam ever to meet elves. And also when Frodo said hello to Gildor by greet he used this greeting in Gildor's language, right? Yeah, and I think that was very touching for me because in the book, Gildor and his friends, they really look pleased. They look really happy when Frodo greeted them in their language. And this is the time when the time of the elves were slowly fading. Many of them start their own journey to undying lands, leaving the Middle Earth, because they felt that our time here is almost ending, and this is not our time anymore. And it's a very sad and somber concept, because that's the nature of the Lord of the Rings. It's elegiac in nature. We look back at the times that have passed. So I think the moment Frodo greeted Gildor in Gildor's language, that was amazing. Like you acknowledge that we were here, and you use the language that we use. You recognize us, you acknowledge us, and you appreciate us. That's the same feeling like when someone actually talk to you with your language.
Yes.
Because they took time learning that language, even though that language maybe is not considered popular, or a prestigious language to learn. It feels like that particular scene when Frodo greeted Gildor in his language. So
Yeah.
that's among my favorite parts in Tolkien's works, especially in The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing those deep personal reflections as well on your favorite parts.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
And that also moves really nicely into the next question, because you have all these wonderful associations with the text. What would you say is your fondest experience of Tolkien's work? Whether this was, if it was when you were reading it, or when you were talking about it with someone, or sharing it with a community, or what would you say was your fondest experience?
Okay, I think it was when I start to be closer to some international members of Tolkien community, right? And at first it was like any other things, like I read their blogs, or I commented on their posts, something like that. And then when I start to get closer with some people, uh, I think the first one was when I had this discussion with someone also in Indonesian Tolkien Society. She was actually one of the founders, and I talked with her a lot because she also had this deep interest about exploring Tolkien's texts. So sometimes we talk, and she connected me to someone from international Tolkien community. It was Becky Dillon on Facebook at that time. Yeah, and at that time I mentioned this book that I'm really interested about because the book talk about the topic that I think it was not discussed a lot. The book about humor and laughter in Tolkien's works. Yeah, that was published by the Walking Tree Publishers. Yeah, Laughter in Middle Earth. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
So that book, so the book published by Walking Tree Publishers in Indonesia, I consider that as even way more expensive than the typical imported book sold here, because well, I don't mind saving money to buy those books, but I have to admit that the price range of those books were way higher than the typical imported books that we found here. So I think at that time I think that at that time my friend mentioned to Becky that I wanted this book, but I didn't know how to get it, because at that time I still didn't have money to buy that. And Becky actually said that, I have multiple copies at my home. If you want, I can send it to you. And she actually sent that book. So when that book arrived, I had to slap my cheek several times because that was one of the first few books about Tolkien that I could acquire. Maybe that around 2016 or 17, maybe that was the time when I finally decided to I have to had this reference books. If I wanted to learn more about Tolkien, I had to have these books. And at that time, I start to buy things like Humphrey Carpenter's biography on Tolkien, and also the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. And I found the ebook of Tom Shippey's book in Google Books, so it was cheaper, so I could buy them. But Walking Tree Publishers, they were kind of expensive, so I'm glad that was my very first books by Walking Tree Publisher that I forgot. I didn't buy that. Someone gifted that to me, and the theme was something that I was really interested about. I'm still interested about that theme because laughter and joke. I don't think that's something that I see being discussed a lot. So that's very insightful. So that was a very fun fun moment, because this person who lives so far away, you know, they actually sent that book to me simply because I nonchalantly mentioned that to somebody, not even to her. And then she just decided to, I have one extra copy. Let me send that to you. So I'm very happy because I start to feel that okay, this is the type of acceptance that I could expect, when I am in this community. And then also when I finally wrote that article about Turin Turambar. Actually, that was inspired by two things. First was when I listened to this episode of Prancing Pony podcast.
Oh, yes.
At that time they were talking about the Silmarillion. They were in the Silmarillion phase, and they were talking about Turin when when he decided to adopt these various names after experiencing this many tragedies in his life. He decided to change his names. The names that were related to things that he hoped he would have avoided, but he couldn't. So at that time it came to my mind this idea that this is actually something familiar. This is something that is related to a part of my culture where parents would change the name of their kids when they feel that these kids cannot handle the spiritual burdens brought by those names. Maybe those names sound so beautiful and majestic, because names are hopes. But then the children start to show signs of sickness, or they keep experience this misfortune, and the parents think that okay, one of the things that we could do to help the kids going through this is probably trying to change their names to something that is something that is still related to their original name, but not usually more humble sounding. I guess I think my parents did that to me. Like
Oh, really?
yeah, my complete name. That probably sounds pretty to some. I don't know, but in here, that is not exactly a name that will make people think, "Oh, that's so beautiful." Like it's pretty, but not something that would make people think it's such a beautiful name. Just a pretty name.
Mm, mm,
But
mm.
yeah, but there is the hope of my parents in that name.
Yes,
So
true.
yeah, so because my mother's pregnancy with me was also difficult, so I think
Uh-huh.
they did that to me. Yeah, I think they did that to me. They changed my name to from something that sounds so majestic in our language to something that's probably still sounds pretty, but
Yeah,
it's a very standard name.
mm,
My complete name, Putri Prihatini.
yeah.
So even though I like the meaning, it's a standard name. I think they did that to me.
Okay,
So because
interesting.
that sounds so familiar, I actually contacted Sean, one of the two of the Prancing Pony podcast hosts. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, but he is so wonderful. He and Alan are so wonderful. So yeah, I mentioned this to Alan, and I asked him, "What do you think about this?" So I commented on his on their post on their episode, and I asked him, "What do you think about this theory, the connection between Turin's names and this part of my culture that I know?" And he said, "I think that's a good idea. And if you want to explore that, maybe writing about that in your blog, maybe I would love to read that." So yeah, I start developing that post into the one that I show you, the one
Mm.
that was finally further developed into a paper for Tolkien Society seminar. And when I finally posted that, and I showed that to Sean, and Sean was, he was wonderful about that. His response uh, told me that, wow, this is something that I actually can do. Like I could. This is probably can be the basis of what I could do with my Tolkien posts. Like before that, I wrote something, you could say superficial, like very obvious topics and themes,
Mm.
something that you could easily find from maybe Wikipedia. But after that particular post, I thought, okay, this is something that I could do, something that I could turn into the very specific thing that people could recognize me for.
Mm,
This
mm,
point
mm.
of view, because the world of Tolkien is so layered, so complicated, so sophisticated, but so grounded at the same time. This is something that a lot of people could connect with, the ideas explore, the themes explore in that world.
Mm.
And probably this is the reason why I could catch something familiar in my mind, even though the world of Tolkien and the inspiration seems so far away from my own cultural background, like that, like it seems like there are no similarities at all, but the connection between teams are there. So it's just me, how to basically build the bridge, that bridge these gaps, because there's
Mm.
no way I read Tolkien without connecting it to my personal experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and that speaks really strongly to what you were saying about how that was something that was you were so drawn to in the beginning, right? The grounded nature and how
Yes.
it can you can make those connections.
Yes.
That's beautiful. I think it's wonderful to be able to see how globally the stories can be recognized in that way because of that. So
Yeah.
what you've been saying, it sort of answers the next question really, but
Okay.
it was because I wanted to know a little bit about how your approach to Tolkien's work has changed over time. So you've said that you started to bring more of your background, the Javanese
Mm-hmm.
mythology and folklore into the texts, into
Uh-huh.
your analysis. Was there anything else that has changed over time with maybe with what you analyze or?
Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So basically, of course, the first time I approached Tolkien, it was again very superficial.
Mm.
I just I just read into the very obvious themes that are explored there, and reading into the characters in a very superficial themes. Although, because like I said, I studied psychology, so I tend to pay more attention to how these characters are described, their motivations and stuffs, But like I said, I found that when I start to approach Tolkien in the way that I just described, and I followed up with other articles with similar themes, like how I connect Erendil with one of the heroes in a Bugis epic poem from South Sulawesi, or how the concept of the image of the trooping fairies, the trooping fairies that sort of also connect with similar spiritual creatures in Japanese culture, and and of course the latest post about the connection between the Silmarillion and the Japanese book of Monarchs, and my other article that is lighter than that in nature, connecting the flower of the flowers that grow on the graveyards of Rohan's kings with the frangipanis, because they both are perceived as a graveyard flowers basically.
Yep.
So what I found is that the way I approach Tolkien, when I start delve deeper into Tolkien's works, I cannot help but thinking that at the same time, I feel like I have to dig deeper into my own roots also. I cannot do one without doing the other. So that's the thing that I slowly realized in the past few years when I start to explore Tolkien in these ways. Like if I want to give people fresh perspectives on viewing Tolkien stories and connecting it to my personal experiences, I have to, of course, dig deeper into my own cultural roots. And it's at first it was not at first. Actually, it's still kind of hard because I was raised in the city, and I'm basically a city girl. My family is from East Java, of course, and I was born and raised in East Borneo, and East Borneo itself is a very very diverse province where people from various areas in Indonesia come to work. Because my hometown is a trade city, so I grew up with Indonesian language instead of my native language, and yeah, I was not exposed enough to traditional songs and other forms of arts. And at school, we studied that, but only as limited in the curriculum, of course, not something that we learn with our hearts, because they are our roots, not something like that. So I kind of neglected those things until recently, actually, because I realized that, like I said before, when I want to approach Tolkien in the more personal way, I have to recognize myself first. I have to understand myself first, deeper, and that also means learning deeper about my own roots and culture. So, I would not expect this a few years ago when I first learned about Tolkien, because I thought that Tolkien is, Tolkien seems so European, and it feels that even though it's a fantasy world, but obviously a lot of his influences were Europeans, of course, and I would love to learn about him from those materials too, his original inspirations too. That's why I work hard to collect the materials and books that I need, and of course, thanks to Luke's efforts in making Malorn finally open access. Yay!
So happy.
Yes, I'm so happy. Finally, I could get even more access to Tolkien related materials that I need. That's very amazing effort. Thanks to everybody who are involved in that effort. So I like that. But at the same time, of course, I would also love to keep digging these fresh perspectives in reading Tolkien. So that's something that I think the thing that slowly changed in the way I approach Tolkien in the past several years.
Oh, that's so beautiful. It's so nice to see that it's transforming not just like your approach to Tolkien, but your own approach to, your culture and like
Yeah,
discovering those roots. Yeah.
yeah, basically my own identities, you know.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. That's so enriching. Yeah, and also just sort of tangentially, because I know that you also run a Twitter where you talk about your work a lot, and I know that you used to do those, or perhaps you still do those Folklore Thursdays posts. And I'm curious
Yeah.
whether you used those to as well to explore this part further, this thing that was triggered by
Yeah.
Tolkien, and then your own explorations.
Okay, actually, the first story when I made this my Twitter account was actually kind of funny
Uh
because
huh.
at that time I was only active in Facebook and maybe Instagram, but I don't really use Instagram that much anymore. So yeah, one of my blog readers, an Indonesian, actually, he said that why don't you make a Twitter account for your blog? Because a lot of people are on Twitter, and I think in
Yeah.
the type of interaction that's actually that feels more active and invigorating than on Facebook alone.
Yeah. True.
And because several years ago I once had Twitter account, but at that time I felt that Twitter was so chaotic. Well,
Yeah.
it's still chaotic. It's
Hmm.
still chaotic. It's still a jungle out there, but at that time I think I still I didn't feel myself fully equipped in facing that environment, so I decided to leave. So so finally last year I finally decided, okay, maybe I should make a Twitter account. But at first I thought simply for my blog, like I'm gonna make this as impersonal as possible, just for my blog. But then I realized that the atmosphere of Twitter really perfect to actually express more than just sharing blog links. Like I could do something
Hmm.
more with this, but what? And then I remember that Dr. Dimitra Fimi actually occasionally joined the Folklore Thursday crowd. I thought that, okay, with maybe I could share something to this crowd about something that is mostly from my own culture, because I noticed that a lot of them are basically not recognized in this sphere. When we talk about popular folklore communities, especially in English language, mine is not so popular. So I thought maybe while I'm doing this Tolkien thing, I will also share these other things that I learned within my journey, and I share this to everybody. And I actually never expected these two things to overlap, but in a lot of ways I feel like they totally overlap. Like, when the more I learn about my own culture or culture of other ethnicities that also live in Indonesia, in the same time I learn about Tolkien, I feel that there are a lot of things that actually can overlap, and a lot of things that I could explore. I could dig deeper. It's just a matter of building this bridge to connect this knowledge, because actually I still do that the folklore Thursday thing. It's just maybe occasionally I don't do that because I have some work to finish or things like that. But I usually do that. I usually make time to share things for folklore Thursday. And with the more things I learn about, and the more I realize that maybe this is something that I could turn into the direction of how I explore Tolkien.
Yes.
So in a lot of things they kind of overlap, especially when I see people's responses about what I tweeted. And sometimes it's not just from the folklore community. Sometimes it's people from the Tolkien fandom and my other fandom, Guromans.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes yeah, sometimes they show their appreciations too. And I thought that, wow, these things really overlap, like they're really connected. You can't just think that these are separate, because it turned out that people from different spheres that I thought maybe will not connect to this actually connect. So yeah, so that's from there, I decided to make my Twitter account more personal, even though the name is still the name of my blog. But I turned the profile picture into my own picture, and maybe perhaps there's this little element of wanting to be visible, because I'm really visible. I'm a visible Muslim woman, and I want people to
Yes.
look at me in that way. Like, this is me. You can help but looking at me like this. I don't want to use a nondescript profile picture because I want people to see me like this. This is my face. I'm the one behind this blog. I'm the one behind these writings. So yeah, that's something that's actually connected to, in a sense, connected to how I explore Tolkien in my blog, and they cannot be fully separated. They are in they might be in different spheres, but in a bigger sense, they are actually connected in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, that's really beautiful, and I love hearing about that power and that visibility
Yeah.
that's really important to you. And I think to a lot of fans around the world to be able to see somebody who looks like them or who looks different from, I guess, the typical Tolkien fan, and to realize that you can access and be a part of this world and bring it into your own
Yeah.
culture too. That's beautiful. So knowing that and knowing how deeply intertwined these two have been and how they've sort of built on each other, your love for Tolkien and your own culture. Would you ever recommend Tolkien's work to anybody else? Why or why not?
Okay. A few years ago, I probably would answer that question with yes, without a doubt. But now, the more I realize that the nature of people who enjoy Tolkien's works or Tolkien-inspired works, and the more I also read about these many stories and poems that Tolkien wrote, the more I realized that this is not something that I could just answer like that. Like, yeah, at first probably I would ask this person about what kind of things that they expect when they read fantasy works, what kind of things that they enjoy. And I usually also explain to people that Tolkien wrote several works. The most notable ones are this, and this. The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion, the collection of his shorter works that are published in Tales from the Perilous Realm, and also poems, and also some essays. So I would explain the gist of each of those works, the nature of each work to this person, so at least they know what could they expect when they read those works. Because yeah, turn out from the stories of the readers of my blogs where they comment, I could see the different ways they approach Tolkien's works, even if those works were translated, which makes it easier for them to read, no language barrier, but it's still very different experience between different work. There are readers who prefer like reading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings because they simply feel these are more familiar, and there are those who actually prefer the Silmarillion, even though that's more difficult in language wise, because they feel like they said to me that one of them said to me that I was first introduced to Middle Earth by game, so they felt that the Silmarillion the pace of the Silmarillion is more suitable for them to enjoy, because when they read the Lord of the Rings, they felt, yeah, this feels a little bit sluggish for me, plot wise, because I was familiar with Middle Earth through game first, and I felt that the Silmarillion gave me the pace that I like when I want to read something from the world of Middle Earth Legendarium. So yeah, so there are a lot of responses about how people enjoy Tolkien. So from now on, whenever someone asks me, I would ask those questions first, and then I would tell them this is the characteristics of each works of Tolkien, and after that you can make your own judgment about which one would you like to read first. Yeah.
That's great. That's a really wise approach for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people get the best inroad
Yeah.
that they can to
Yeah.
enjoy it. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Putri, is there anything that you are working on at the moment that you would like our listeners to know about? Any new post that you have in the works or any project that you're doing?
Actually, there is no specific project, but I feel that because my blog, when I look back at my blog right now, the post that I have released, I realized that there were only like maybe six six posts in the nature that I just explained, the ones that give readers fresh perspectives in viewing Tolkien, in the sense of exploring the connection between Tolkien and specific cultures. And well, I could say that there is nothing like them, like the cultural background and the theories that I use to explore Tolkien are not. I don't think they are something that I've ever seen before. So this is like a huge work for me because I had to learn about a lot of things. Many of these things actually do not have English sources, so I had to do my best to describe them in the so that the people understand them in the context of the blog post. So I think this is something that I would like to do in the future. I want to keep doing this in the future with my blog because I feel like in the last few years I finally found the specific thing that I could show people that this is the thing that you could, you know, I could be recognized for something that I could contribute to the international Tolkien community, a perspective that is probably not explored very much, but at the same time it feels very personal, very meaningful for me. And I cannot just ignore the connection because it's there. But of course I have to explore that much deeper, like I cannot just give a superficial analysis. I have to dig deeper to make people understand that this is the bridge that gap that this is the bridge that connect this gap, these two things that look very different but actually have connection. It's just a matter of where is the connection. And to find out where is the connection, I had to learn more about these things. And this is I think this is the one thing that I want to keep doing for now, that I want to uh, 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 bridge the gap between my own personal experience and my very specific point of view in exploring Tolkien, and hopefully give readers out there, fresh perspectives in viewing Tolkien's works. And even though in like their works, like my recent post about exploring the some flowers that appear in Tolkien's works, and one of them I actually connected them to how Southeast Asian culture connect the similar graveyard flower types, so there is the
Yes.
connection in that. So that's, I consider that one of my lighter posts. But even in lighter posts, I would like people to see something new. I would love them to leave my blog with the feeling that, okay, that is quite satisfying. That is a satisfying meal. Probably a light meal, but very satisfying light meal. And I think currently I'm working on another light post. Probably not something that requires this deep, overly deep understandings, but I think something that I could connect to other thing in my culture actually, and something that is actually delight me to do because it has something to do with cats.
Ooh,
But you
very
have to wait.
exciting.
Yeah, you have to wait for that, because we know Tolkien's view, about cats in his work, right? It's not so flattering, especially when he described Juan in this flattering way. And I thought, okay, Juan got this long amazing arc about himself, and on the other hand, cats are related with things that are not really flattering. like how could you suggest someone in your letter that a Siamese cat is actually a fauna of Mordor? I don't think that's too
No.
much. No. So,
Oh
but
God.
so I would like to write something. This new post, like I said, it's just a light post, not something really
Mm.
heavy. But I would love to approach cats in Tolkien's work in a slightly more positive way. And I think
Mhm.
I found a way to connect that with something that I'm also familiar with from my own culture
Mhm.
related to cats.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So you have to wait for that because I'm going to write that in English. So
Mhm.
so a lot of people could read that. Yeah. You can say that it's my second week of Ramadan project.
Lovely, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, as a cat lover and a Tolkien fan, I'm very much looking forward to this post, and I'm sure
Yes.
many of our listeners are as well.
Yeah, and
Well,
I actually hope that with the fact that my one of my articles were nominated for the awards, I do not have any future projections about those kind of things, but I do hope that when there is opportunities like that again, if there is an opportunity like that where I could contribute something, maybe I would join. But at the moment, I do not have any specific thought about what future project that I could contribute. But I would
mm,
love to do something like that someday. So I guess we'll just see for that. So yeah, and I think as my final word, I think if you could because this is basically the last question, right?
it is.
Yeah. So I think for my final word, I would say something like this. Lately I've on Twitter I've seen people who got basically got angry because there are people readers who describe their personal interpretations in Tolkien's works, whether is it the characters, the way they draw the characters, or the way they maybe write uh, like uh, stories like fan fiction prompts, for example,
Mm,
and I saw, especially I think it's very visible in fan arts. I think
yes.
fan arts, the way people draw Tolkien's characters, and I just want to say that I think no matter how loud you shout about this is not the right interpretation, there's only one correct interpretation of Tolkien's works. I feel that interpreting Tolkien's works is something like this. If I have to describe this is in an image, like we could imagine Tolkien as someone who is sitting in the middle of this really large space, large room, and he's sitting in the middle, and he brought a bunch of these colorful yarns, and then he starts stitching this fabric using these colorful yarns, creating his own motifs and combination of colors. And the fabric that he stitched got bigger and bigger. It started to attract other people's attention. People start coming, and then they see what he's doing. At first, they just admire this fabric. Wow, it's so beautiful. But then when the fabric got bigger and bigger and bigger, they start touching this fabric. And then they start thinking, okay, I would love to contribute something. I would love to add in my own colors to this fabric. And then they start to one by one sitting next to Tolkien. And then they bring their own yarns, their own colors, and then they start uh, stitching the extension of that fabric that Tolkien started, and
Mm,
they use their own combination of colors, they use their own motifs, and then this fabric got bigger and bigger and bigger. More people come and stitching their own colorful yarns and creating their own combinations in that fabric, and that fabric became so large that sometimes you cannot see what other people in the other side of this fabric stitching, knitting, because they bring their own colors that you probably don't know what they knit. You do not know what motifs that they come up with, but they are there, and they create their own combinations, their own unique interpretations of this large fabric. But at the end of the day, they are still a part of this one giant fabric with Tolkien at the center. So that's how I view people who create their own interpretations of Tolkien's works, whether it is by fan fictions or by their own stories or by artworks. So there is no one true way to interpret his works, and we do that not because we hate Tolkien, it's because we really love his works, and we want to show people that this is what we feel about his works. This is how we express our love to him, because yeah, at the end of the day, no matter how loud some people shout, they cannot take that interpretation from you because it's a personal thing. I've seen these very creative and even personal interpretations of how people see Tolkien's works and characters. Like, for example, I've seen some pictures where Tolkien's characters, like the dwarves or the hobbits, were depicted with very personal things like top surgery scars, and I think that's amazing because not only people could see themselves in these characters that they love. It's not that far off thinking that maybe the dwarfs with the fact that they are this have this really great craftsmanship culture, maybe they could develop something like this, a technology to conduct surgery like this, like something similar to top surgery. And I think that's amazing, seeing how people could see themselves in these characters, inventing the new way they could make these characters look like this, like themselves in these pictures, like the dwarves or the hobbits having these top surgery scars. Because once again, this is not because we hate Tolkien. Actually, this is because the people who created these things love Tolkien so much that they really want to express this love in the way that they know, in the way that is so personal of them, in the way that it shows other people this is my unique, specific way of showing my love to Tolkien. And I think this also applies to other ways people express their love to Tolkien, like depicting some characters as having this different like gender identities. For example, they see themselves being represented in the story, but once again it is done out of love of Tolkien, and the way they want to express that love in the way that they understand, they know, and uh, they really can connect with their own life. Yeah, so that's my final word.
That was such a beautifully illustrated and encouraging and positive message, Putri. Thank you for sharing it with us.
And thank you for having me and allowing me to say all these things.
It was beautiful. I loved hearing all of your insights and your experiences. If our listeners would like to follow you, to follow your blog or your social media, where can we find you on the internet?
Okay, so I think I'm now most active on Twitter. So my username is blog Tolkien. Yeah, but I use my real name is Putri Prihatini, and the next to that is my handle blog Tolkien. And for my website, the name is the Loremasters Blog Tolkien Indonesia. I think writing Blog Tolkien Indonesia in search engine will immediately bring you to my blog, because as far as I know, this is a one very specific blog written from an Indonesian perspective that I could find, because I really cater my blog to Tolkien now. I use this blog used to be random, but now I turned it into a very specific Tolkien blog, and that's why I add the title Blog Tolkien Indonesia, so it becomes more specific. Because, well, to be perfectly honest, the link, the URL to my blog, it kind of sucks, because it doesn't really describe my blog. Yeah, you could see the yeah, because it was a random blog at first, and for some reason I couldn't change it. I don't know why. So
Oh, I see.
yeah, so I had to stick with that address. So I put that address in in my Twitter profile. So everybody who visited my Twitter profile, they could they could click the link to my blog from there. And of course, whenever I have a new post, I will always share that to my platforms, including to Twitter. So I think even though I have Facebook page for my blog, I'm now most active on Twitter. So
All right.
Twitter @blog Tolkien.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you once again so much for joining us today, Putri. It was wonderful to have you on the podcast.
And thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @LukeB.Shelton.
I'm @SR.Westvik.
And I'm @Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.